Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on National Concussion Awareness Day. Back in 2016, a woman named Brooke Mills created the Day of Education and Awareness after suffering from a concussion herself as a freshman in high school. According to the Utah Department of Health, traumatic brain injury is the leading cause of death and disability in Utah, and an average of 14 students suffer from a concussion each week at school. Tonight, we'll hear from people who suffered from concussions and TBIs and what can be done to help reduce the impact on their lives. Kicking off our conversation tonight is Lauralea Banks Edwards, a concussion and trauma survivor. Lauralea, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Tell us about when you got a concussion and what happened from there.
So just a little over 2 months ago, at the beginning of July, I was cleaning up my house for a birthday party and walked very hard and fast into my son's ceiling. And it stunned me a little bit at first, but I was very busy and very focused, so I just kept going along. And the next morning I woke up and I was just having a really hard time focusing visually, mentally. I had a really bad headache. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Steven, who's a former Army medic. And as I was talking to him and telling him, like, I just don't feel right, I'm not really sure what's going on, he asked me if I had hit my head, and I said, actually, I did. And he's like, well, your symptoms are very classic for a concussion, and if that's the case, you really need to go get it checked out. And I took that seriously because I had a advisor in college who died from a traumatic brain injury a couple of years ago. So I went and got it checked out. Thankfully, there was no brain bleed. But then for the next six to 9 weeks, I just really struggled doing normal day-to-day things.
So this just shows that you can get a concussion anywhere. You don't have to be engaging in super active sports or any sort of heavy workout. And I understand that there are not just cognitive side effects to concussions, but there's also an emotional side as well?
Yes, that's right. We talk a lot about the headaches, the visual sensitivity, the auditory sensitivity, but we don't talk a lot about the fact that our brains are also the center of our emotions, and we can also experience heightened emotionality. I, for example, would wake up on mornings crying inconsolably for no reason. I would have what I call irrational anger, and there was nothing that was provoking it, and it was really kind of disorienting. I felt a lot like a small child in a lot of ways with my emotions.
And that can be so hard when you can't control that. So what are some of the best coping mechanisms for both the emotional and mental side effects?
Well, it depends on each individual. We all experience concussions a little differently. For me, I had a lot of visual sensitivity. You saw that picture of me wearing the weird large glasses and the really cool hat that actually had ice packs in it. I called it my gangsta concussion look. So that worked a lot for the mental side. For the emotional side, it just was reaching out a lot, just kind of sitting with the emotions, not reacting strongly to them. And then also my secret weapon was a frozen orange. If I felt really overwhelmed with my emotions, I would just hold the frozen orange and it would help keep me anchored and allow me to not be reactive to the emotions. Because the other part is you don't want to amplify things more than they already occur. Otherwise, your brain has an even harder time healing.
I love that you are sharing some of your personal mechanisms, and you're right, everybody has their own ways of doing it, but it's always nice to hear what works for some people and what works for others. Now, the month of September is also National Suicide Prevention Month, so how does the topic of suicide also play a role in this conversation about concussions and brain injuries?
Well, if you think about it, we don't all come into a situation with a concussion with a blank slate. We all come in with pre-existing conditions. For me, I got my concussion on top of being diagnosed with complex PTSD. And when I then started experiencing these overwhelming emotions, it's like adding fuel to a fire, and just everything someone else might have been experiencing it as a 6, I was experiencing it as an 11. And I have to say that if I hadn't already been in treatment for my PTSD, I wouldn't have known how to reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Line on the days when my suicidal ideations got really bad, because my normal mental coping mechanisms weren't working with the concussion. My brain was damaged and wasn't able to handle things the way it handled it before. And if I hadn't had the National Suicide Prevention Line and family and friends who knew what was going on, who I could reach out to, things could have gone south very quickly.
We just talked about suicidal ideations the other day on a different In Focus show, and this is one of the reasons why, we're dealing with this crisis in our state. Lauralea, we have time for one more question. What should someone look for so that they can take a concussion seriously and avoid pushing their boundaries?
So the first thing I think that's really important is just being really aware of what's going on in your body and in your mind. This is not something that a lot of people are taught how to do. Just checking in with yourself. Is the action that you're taking hurting your brain? Are you getting a headache from it? If you are, just immediately stepping back, moving very slowly. I had to do everything painfully slowly, simple things like pouring a bowl of cereal in the morning, doing it at half the pace I would have done it before, so that if I started feeling pressure or started feeling a headache coming on, I could immediately stop and step back and let my brain kind of recover from that action.
You've been hearing from Lauralea Banks Edwards, a concussion and trauma survivor. Lauralea, thank you so much for sharing your insight and experience tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on National Concussion Awareness Day. Up next in our conversation is Jamie Mo-Crazy, an X Games athlete and coma survivor. Jamie, thank you so much for being here tonight and welcome to the show. Let's start with hearing about your story and how your life was forever changed by the traumatic brain injury that you've experienced.
I'd love to tell you that. So I was a professional skier. I was traveling around the world, competing. I went to X Games. I was actually the first woman in the world to compete a double flip in the 2013 X Games. So it seemed like I was heading up the mountain of life when I was caught by a metaphorical avalanche that slid me down to the bottom. And in the blink of an eye, my life changed. When I was at World Tour Finals in 2015 and I crashed and I hit my head and my brain started bleeding in 8 spots and I hurt my right brainstem, which paralyzed my right side, and I immediately went into a coma. I was in a coma, I had serious amnesia, so no memory for 6 weeks, and then I had to relearn every base gross motor skill, my cognition, everything.
And just to put that in perspective, how long ago did your TBI happen?
My TBI was in April 11th, 2015.
Okay, so it's been 6 years there, and we can see the photos up there on the screen of where you had to start over again, and we get to see you now after you had to relearn everything and just this amazing journey that you've been on. And you're here tonight to join us on this conversation about concussions. Let's switch gears. What are some common misconceptions about maybe concussions and TBIs that most people don't really know or think about?
Well, one of the most common perceptions from concussions and TBI is that after something happens to your brain, you're going to live a worse life. That's not true. Understanding neuroplasticity, we know our brains can heal. It's so exciting. We can live amazing lives again. So that's one of the main misconceptions. And another one is when you're healing to just be super still. And that's not actually what you want to do. You want to keep in control of your body and have it be kind of still, but you want to be walking, you want to go outside, you want to eat. What you put into your body affects the outcome you experience. So there's so much more we can control about our healing from concussions and traumatic brain injuries than we understand we can control.
That's good to know. For those that might, be fresh out of a TBI, it's not the end of the world. And as you can see here with our wonderful Jamie, normalcy is so possible. So Jamie, talk about how concussions are actually invisible injuries that can cause some real deficits.
Yes, well, 50% of our homeless population has had traumatic brain injuries, and 87% of those who are incarcerated. Which just, if you think about those numbers, 1 in 4 have concussions and traumatic brain injuries. That means there's so many Americans that have it, yet the injury is completely invisible. So take that you're at a soccer game, and if you break your leg, what happens? You go to the doctor, you get a cast on it, you take some time off, your leg heals, and then you go back to playing soccer. However, if you go to the same exact game and you get a concussion, what happens can be so different. Your coach might make you take a little time off, maybe a couple of weeks off, but they don't do much about it. They don't do much to heal it. and it can heal and come back, but the thing is you have to take action. You have to do things to heal your brain after a concussion because those deficits will happen, so we need to heal ourselves before we go back to playing in the next soccer game.
And so I'm curious, what are some of the ways that deficits can be healed?
Well, one of the important things is to pay attention to recognizing the deficits. So a lot of emotional deficits are completely invisible, and you might be having traumatic experiences, you might be behaving irrationally, and instead of ignoring it, recognize it. So that's the first thing. Start recognizing that something happened and admitting that you need to start taking action to heal yourself. And then doing things like going outside. Nature therapy is huge for recovery. Doing walks outside and paying attention to what you put into your body. Your nutrition, there's a big connection between your gut and your brain. And if you pay attention to what you're putting into your body, then your outcomes will be different than you expected.
You climbed an alternative peak after your brain injury. What was that experience like?
Well, it was all sorts of different experiences of roller coasters and all sorts of things. Because when I left the hospital, I had to relearn how to walk. I failed Rosetta Stone in English, my native language, in the hospital 7 times. So I really was at the bottom and I had to get to the top. Or I could stay at the bottom, but I chose to climb an alternative peak. And during that process, I had incredible support. My mom has over 30 years of experience understanding about the brain. So she has a master's in psychology, in early childhood brain development, and she used that when she arrived as my caregiver. She had a strategy and a plan to get me to start to recover and crash through ceilings and climb an alternative peak with the best views in the process.
And now you're sharing all of that you've learned and experienced with other people. Tell us about the Mo Crazy Miracle event. What is it about and who is your target demographic for it?
I'd love to tell you about that. I am so excited. So on October 2nd and 3rd, we are partnering with the National Ability Center in Park City to offer an activity-based camp, an activity-based as well as education, which is key. Because you're gonna get to go on high ropes, you're gonna get to go rock climbing, there's gonna be meals included, dinner so you can socialize with other survivors and caregivers, because, as I might not have mentioned, this event, Mo Crazy Miracles, is for traumatic brain injury survivors and caregivers. And it's for all different levels, so no matter what ability you have, you can do it. Because one of the coolest things, I think, is that if you are in a wheelchair, you can go to the National Ability Center and do the high ropes course. And so no matter how mild your traumatic brain injury is or how severe it is, we would love you to come to this event, and registration ends on Sunday at midnight. So if you're hearing this, buy the tickets now. You can look at Mo Crazy Strong. Remember, Mo Crazy Strong. And on my Instagram, links in the bio. So buy the tickets and come play with me and have fun.
Jamie, I love your energy. Thank you so much. Friends, you've been hearing from Jamie Mo Crazy, an X Games athlete and coma survivor. Jamie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We appreciate you spending your Friday evening with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited, and I hope that people listening will come get tickets so I get to meet you.
We'll be right back. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on National Concussion Awareness Day. Rounding out our conversation tonight is Ashley Burge, coach of the Utah Warriors High School Boys Rugby team. And Ashley, great to have you here. Thank you so much for being a part of our conversation. We want to get to know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself because you've got quite the resume.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, I'm from Harriman, Utah. Actually, I'm 25 years old. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I was blessed with the opportunity to get into the U.S. Army World Class Athlete Program, which provided me with a really incredible platform to play rugby on the USA Women's National Team, which was just, you know, an incredible experience. I'm now back in Utah, and I coach the Utah High School Warriors Academy team, and I do sideline reporting for the Utah Warriors professional men's rugby team up in Harriman, so it's really awesome.
Ashley, is there anything you can't do?
Dancing.
You're awesome. I've loved getting to know you through your pictures and just the brief interaction that we've had. Now, we know that concussions are a common concern in rugby and many other sports, no matter how old you are. But let's talk about the younger athletes first. Why should concussions be taken so seriously in youth sports?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no concussion expert, but kids' brains are still developing, and life doesn't end at youth sports, and that's really important to remember. You know, they've got school, they've got college, they've got careers, relationships, family, friends, and, you know, not properly taking care of or dealing with concussions at a young age can leave long-term effects in these kids' lives and affect their quality of life. So it's really important just to, you know, take it seriously while they're young and, you know, ensure that they have a healthy brain for forever.
Okay, so we're raising the red flags now, and now I'd like to talk about the knowledge, the education, the awareness. What can parents do to help out when it comes to concussions, and what are some of the things that they can look out for?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to just be aware. As a parent, you know your kid better than anybody else. And sometimes it's really difficult for kids to explain the symptoms of a concussion. As an adult, professional athlete, I can explain that I feel foggy. A child may not be able to express that to their parents. And concussions affect you in all sorts of areas. So it's really important for parents, teammates, friends, you know, after a contact sport to just pay attention to your kids, you know, physical habits, their, you know, mental state, their emotional state, their cognitive abilities. Those are all things to pay attention to. And also another big thing is to just not push that child. It's really just easy to say, you know, just keep going, like you get a knock to the head and it's just like, push yourself, you got it, you know, we'll check you out after. But you've got to take it serious, you know, seek medical help and don't allow your child to continue to play contact sports until they're cleared, you know, by a medical professional after a concussion.
Okay, so obviously this is a common question you probably get a lot when it comes to this topic. Do you have to get knocked unconscious to actually have a concussion?
No, it's actually a common misconception, and majority of concussions you actually don't, you know, go completely unconscious. So it just depends. It's, you know, every situation's different, every person's different, every concussion's different. It's all about the force to your head, and, you know, like we heard earlier, it can be a ginormous blow to your head from a skiing accident or running into a wall. So, you know, there's no one-stop shop when it comes to concussions.
So how are rugby players taught to prevent concussions?
Tackle technique is the number one thing, and we harp on it all the time. In rugby, you don't have a helmet, you don't have pads, so oftentimes you'd think that there would be more concussions than other sports, but it's actually not true because you feel that vulnerability not having a helmet, and it leads you to trying to be more responsible with your body and your brain and what you do. And as a coach, you know, I try to instill habits in practice. So when our athletes go into games and it goes to tackling somebody or being tackled, they feel confident in their abilities, and, you know, those habits have been formed to where they can go play safe rugby.
Now, what types of protocols are taken in rugby when someone has a concussion?
It really depends on the level, the league, the policies that are in place. But for example, on the U.S. women's national team and a lot of other professional teams, you take a concussion test when you're at your healthiest state of mind. And this tests your, you know, rate that you can answer questions, problem solving, memory, you know, all sorts of different things. And those are things that are affected when you have a concussion. So when you're suspected of having a concussion, along with monitoring other symptoms, you retake this test, and you can't lie and say you're okay when your test scores show you're, you know, pretty off. And you are continually monitored day by day. You take this test over and over until you get back to your normal state of mind to where your scores are leveling out. And even then you may have a couple of days before, you know, you're medically cleared. So there's different policies. You know, everyone does it different, but that's just one example of a way that we on the national team have monitored concussions.
A lot of great tips and things that have been discussed during this conversation. Ashley, we have time for final words. Anything you want our audience and viewers to think about, or maybe a message that you would like to leave them with tonight?
Yeah, I would just say be safe, take care of yourself. You know, there's a lot of life ahead of you. Some people are lucky enough to play sports as a profession. You know, I was one of those people, and some people aren't, but there's always life after that too. And taking care of your brain and your body will, you know, just ensure that you're healthy and that, you know, you can be happy and safe.
You've been hearing from Ashley Burge, coach of the Utah Warriors high school boys rugby team. And Ashley, thank you so much for being here tonight and spending your Friday evening with us.
Thank you for having me.